Hello students, I am Asmita Chaudhary, Assistant Professor, MCA Department, ISMR Pune. Welcome you to this video lecture series on OS. In this video, we are going to discuss component diagram and deployment diagram. What are the notations used for component and deployment diagram? And also we will discuss the example of component and deployment diagram. Now let us start with the component diagram. Component diagrams are different in terms of nature and behavior. Component diagram is a special kind of diagram in unified modeling language. These diagrams are also used to make executable system. It does not describe the functionality of the system, but it describes the components used to make those functionalities. Component diagrams are used to model the physical aspects of the system. Now the question is, what are these physical aspects? Physical aspects are the elements such as executables, libraries, files, documents which are reside in the node. Component diagrams are used to visualize the relationships among the components in the system. The purpose is also different for all the diagrams. The purpose of the component diagram can be summarized as the component diagram is used to visualize the components of the system. It also useful to describe the organization and relationship of the components. Component diagrams are used during the implementation phase of an application. However, it is prepared well in advance to visualize the implementation details. This diagram is very important as without it, the application cannot be implemented efficiently. So let us see what are the notation used in the component diagram. The first notation used in the component diagram is this, that is a component. A component is a logical unit block of the system, a slightly higher abstraction than classes. It is represented as a rectangle with the smaller rectangle in upper right corner with the types or the word written above the name of the component to help distinguish it from the class. Second notation is the dependency. Draw the dependency among the components, use the dashed arrows. Third one is the interfaces. Okay. An interface describes the group of operations used or created by components. A full circle represents an interface created or provided by the component. A semicircle represents a required interface like a person's input. Fourth notation is port. Ports are represented using square along the edge of the system or component. A port is often used to help to expose required and provided interfaces of a component. Now let us see the example of component diagram. This is a component diagram designed with respect of your project development. Suppose you are going to develop the project in PHP, or if you are using the language or the software for development as PHP, then in that case, these are the components required for PHP platform. Okay, suppose if for GUI designing, you are going to use HTML, CSS, that is cascading style sheet, JavaScript or jQuery file, that you can represent like this, because these calls the PHP files where you actually written your business logic. And again, PHP file uses the application files, some application files and some JSON files. So this is the component diagram designed for PHP. Now let us discuss the component diagram designed or drawn for Java application. So if you are going to develop the project or software using Java, then these will be component you have to consider for component diagram. So as I represented here, JSP. So because JSP is used for development purpose, so JSP component uses the class component, that is a dot class file. As I said, it is a executable files or extensions are used in the component diagram. JSP file also uses the HTML file for designing purpose. Now we know within HTML file only the CSS code is written. So HTML file uses the .css code. Again, JSP file uses these for GUI designing, that is JSP file uses HTML, JSP file uses CSS and JSP file uses .js file. So this is the component diagram. Now we will move ahead to the deployment diagram. Deployment diagram are used to visualize the topology of the physical components of the system, where the software components are deployed. Deployment diagrams are used to describe the static deployment view of the system. Deployment diagram consists of nodes and their relationship. Basically, deployment diagrams are used for describing the hardware components where the software components are deployed. The purpose of the deployment diagram can be described as: deployment diagram is used to visualize the hardware topology of the system. It is also described the hardware components used to deploy the software components. Deployment diagram describes also the runtime processing nodes. So what we understood from this is component diagram are used to describe the components, and deployment diagrams shows how they are deployed in the hardware. So let us discuss the notations used in the deployment diagram. The first important notation used in the deployment diagram is this: node. A node is represented as a cube, which is a physical entity that executes one or more components, subsystem, or executables. A node could be a hardware or software element. Now next is a communication association. This is represented by solid line between the two nodes. It shows the path of communication between node. The third is the device. The device is a node that is used to represent a physical computational resource in the system. An example of a device is an application server. So let us see the example through which you will understand what exactly the deployment diagram is. This is the deployment diagram you considered for PHP application. If you are developing the project in PHP, and now if you wanted to host or deploy your application which is already designed in PHP, so what are the component deployment, or what are the components required for this are: the first, usually for PHP we require the server as XAMPP, and we require the, suppose we are using here database as MySQL, okay, and the third node is represented with the Chrome. So what it means is, so executing PHP code in your project, generally the XAMPP server is used, and whatever database you are using in your project, that you can represent under the database node, and your client is going to access your whole application through some browser. So specify the browser which you are specifically using for your application. So if you are developing the project in a Java, so what will be the deployment diagram for that? So this will be the deployment diagram for the Java. So for Java, executing Java program, we require Apache Tomcat Web Server. And if you are using database as MySQL or Oracle or any other database like Access, then you can define using this. And as I said, as it is a web application, so client is going to access your application through the browser. So I have shown here two examples. See the notations used for the component. This is one notation you may find in your reference books. This is the another notations. Okay, either you can use this symbol or you can represent the component using this symbol. Okay, now what we understood from this is, or what you will understood from this is, component diagrams are used for modeling the components of the system, modeling the executables of an application, and for modeling the system source code. And what we understood from the deployment diagrams can be used to model the hardware topology of the system. It will be useful for the embedded application, and also deployment diagram used for hardware details for client server application. Deployment diagram also model the hardware details of distributed application. So this is all about your component and deployment diagram. We will meet in the next session very soon.